So our last small section in chapter 3 is just a little bit of information about some common or interesting autosomal disorders. So autosomal means that it is found on one of the non-sex chromosomes. And I have a couple of examples for you that are both autosomal examples and, recessive examples and dominant examples. Now, I'm not actually going to go through and read everything on the slide for you. You can find the slides in Brightspace with this information on it. You are more than welcome to learn a little bit about these if you would like. I'm just going to very briefly introduce them, and then you can pause to write them down or just read through. We have a couple examples of autosomal recessive. So autosomal means it is found on a non-sex chromosome, or an autosome. This is going to be chromosomes 1 through 22, and then our third chromosome is going to be the sex chromosome, either the X or the Y. Remember that recessive means that one of the alleles is covered up or masked by the other, the dominant one. And so what that means is that these traits are often maintained in the population because parents can be carriers. So a carrier means that they have the allele, but they do not express the trait because they're hiding that recessive. So two well-known examples are albinism. Albinism is the lack of melanin pigment in the skin, eyes, and hair. And then Tay-Sachs is a disorder where lipids accumulate in the brain because cells are missing the enzyme to break down those lipids. Another common example is sickle cell. This is the production of a mutated version of hemoglobin that causes the red blood cells to take on a sickle shape and produces a wide variety of negative phenotypes associated with it. One more example of an autosomal recessive that is relatively common and well studied, relatively common meaning well known, is cystic fibrosis. So this is the most common lethal genetic disorder in the US. There are some treatments available for it. But because these are genetic disorders, there's really no cure for them. Cystic fibrosis results from a faulty chlorine ion transporter. Basically, there are proteins in the cell membrane that are supposed to regulate the movement of chlorine. And when chlorine is not moved properly, it accumulates and causes a thick mucus to build up along the organs, particularly the lungs, which leads to problems breathing, infections, and whatnot. And then lastly, we have two examples of autosomal dominant disorders. They both have different origins, different genetic reasons for being autosomal dominant. Lethal dominant disorders are rare because so many individuals that have them lethal dominant means that if you have just one dominant allele, it's lethal. So those individuals are not probably passing on their disorder. But there are a couple of dominant disorders. Achondroplasia, which is a type of dwarfism, is a dominant disorder. And one thing I always tell students to remember is dominant does not equal common. Same thing, recessive does not mean that it is uncommon. And the example that I use is this. For achondroplasia, 99.9% of the population is homozygous recessive. That means the most common allele is the recessive one. Dominance and recessive, remember, is a pattern. It has nothing to do with necessarily how common the alleles are. The reason that students confuse this is that we usually think of recessive examples that are things that are relatively uncommon. And because dominants cover up alleles, we tend to see that dominant alleles are more common, but they do not have to be. Another example is Huntington's disease. Huntington's disease is actually a chromosomal alteration rather than a sequence mutation. But this one is basically a degeneration of the nervous system that is the result of repeat sequences in the chromosome. And I think we talk about this one a little bit later in the semester when we talk about chromosomal alterations.